motions? Okay, can we proceed with that? Is that agreed, ladies and gentlemen? Thank you very much, Councillor Robinson.
And I've just remembered I should have turned my microphone on when I done that.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Friel. We'll just wait for the Councillor Robinson to take the chair, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. And if I may, just like to express my gratitude at the privilege of being re-elected as your chair again for this year. I think we've got a really exciting year ahead for us, particularly when we think about how our Mayor, Steve Rotherham, has just been re-elected with a very strong mandate, but more importantly, a really visionary manifesto that at its heart includes the vision for a London-style transport network with all of the different component parts, whether it's sort of using devolved buses, powers, introducing our brand new fleet of rolling stock on the Merseyrail network, fighting for a full high-speed NPR link into the city centre, and so many other component parts as well that I think this year is going to be crucial for us and absolutely fascinating when we get stuck into the hard work of delivering that vision with Steve and the combined authority. If I also may, just wanted to sort of put on record my thanks to our good friends and colleagues at Wirral Council for hosting us today here at the Floral Pavilion in New Brighton. I think, look, New Brighton's a fantastic place to come to. I remember as a child having a couple of days out here, and it's fair to say that it perhaps wasn't enjoying its glory days back in the early 1990s, but I can honestly say I think it's fast becoming a new jewel in the city region's visitor economy crown, so it's wonderful that we've been able to come here. Obviously, the reason that we are here is because of very unique times that we are in with regard to the way that the pandemic is still present with us as a region, as a nation, as a globe. And because of the fact that whilst we are now having in-person meetings again, and it's wonderful to see everyone in person rather than just through a screen, we have restrictions in place at Man Island that mean that this is the best location. It's an exceptional venue for us to hold the meeting. And I'll just sort of make this as a kind of a final point, because I'm very, very conscious of the fact that the pandemic is still ongoing. And whilst we've always rightfully and will continually thank everyone on the front line of the public transport network for everything they've done over the past 18 months to keep our city region moving, and particularly ensure that essential workers and those people who are performing a key role can get around. We also need to make sure that we play our part in supporting them. And by we, I don't just mean us as elected members. I don't just mean Mersey Travel and the combined authority. I mean all 1.6 million of us that live in this city region and travel on our transport network. And I think for us, it's very, very clear that we strongly believe that one of the things that we all should be doing is continuing to wear a facial covering whenever we are on the public transport network. It's the very least that we owe, not just to those people who work on the network, but crucially to everyone that are travelling around. And let me be very clear about it. The best way to do that is for the government to think again around the fact that they are revoking the legislation that means from Monday, if they don't think again, actually it will no longer be a legal requirement to wear a face covering on public transport. And that's certainly something that our Mayor, Steve Rotherham, has said very strongly back to government. I know it's certainly something that all of the transport companies agree with, that actually that legislative requirement should remain in place. And I really hope that government listen, think again, and from Monday we continue with the fact that people should be wearing a facial covering. And certainly in all of our communications, we will be continuing to work with all the transport companies to say that we really do require and wish to see everyone on the network, unless they've got an exemption, to be wearing a facial covering. Anyway, let me move on to the next items on the agenda. And can I ask for a nomination for the Vice Chair as item number 2? And I would like to nominate Councillor Gordon Free. Is that seconded?
Can I second that, please, Chair?
Thanks, John. Are there any further nominations for Vice Chair? If not, then Gordon, can I congratulate you on being re-elected as Vice Chair of the committee? Lovely. I think we've also got a little bit of housekeeping that's worth me just mentioning as well. Obviously, if anyone has a mobile phone with them, I'm sure everybody does these days, please can we have that turned to silent. Obviously, because we're in a slightly different location today, the microphone system might be slightly different to that you're used to at Man Island or your own constituent council. The way to use it is just to push the little kind of icon, speak icon, and then it should glow red and you can speak into the microphone accordingly. If anybody does want to film the meeting, obviously it is being broadcast on the Combined Authority's website, but if anyone wants to do their own private filming, we're obviously very much encouraging of that, but we would always ask that you liaise with our colleagues from Democratic Services, just to make sure that kind of there's no sort of interference with any of the different systems it might cause, but equally as well that we don't lead to any breaches of the Data Protection Act accordingly as well. I also think now is a very sort of suitable opportunity just to welcome some new faces and sort of thank some old friends. Because this year we've got 9 new members that are joining the committee. We've got Councillors John Donnelly and Tommy Rowe from Knowsley. We've got also Councillor Joanne Burke from Knowsley. Lindsay Melia from Liverpool is joining us. And Tony Brough and Sean Halsall are joining us from Sefton. And we've also got Jeanette Banks and Damien O'Connor joining us from St Helens. And Chris Cook is joining us from the Wirral this year. So really looking forward to working with all of you over the year ahead, and I've no doubt that you'll all bring some fantastic ideas and efforts and kind of additional qualities to the committee that can only strengthen our work, and really looking forward to that work as we go ahead. Obviously, as new faces join, old ones depart, and it's very sort of suitable that we put on record our thanks to Councillors Margie O'Mara, Linda Mooney and Francis Wynne, all from Knowsley, Helen Thompson from Liverpool, Pat Cleary from the Wirral, John Wiseman and Nancy Ruddin, and I also think Sue Murphy from St Helens over the past municipal year took part, and from Sefton, Patrick McKinley. And I'm also just going to specifically mention John Dodd, who had been a representative from Sefton, who was first appointed to what was then the Merseyside Passenger Transport Authority in 2001. So John has spent over 2 decades with us, being involved in the work of the Transport Authority and now the Transport Committee of the Combined Authority. So we very much put on record our thanks to him and all of those other departing members for all of their efforts. And with the committee's indulgence, I will write on our collective behalf to thank them for all of their efforts and service on behalf of their constituents and the wider city region. If I move on to the third item, can I call for apologies for absence? And Lisa, have we had any apologies?
We have received some apologies, Chair, from Councillors Tony Brough, Alan Jones, Damien O'Connor and Joe Pearson.
Okay, and could we also add to that Councillor Jed Philbin and Councillor Harry Howard? I know Harry particularly is convalescing following a recent operation. I know for a fact he is watching on the live stream, so if we can wish him all our very best for a speedy recovery. And for all of those other members that I know have got medical-related absences as to why they can't be with us, particularly at this very challenging time with the pandemic, we wish them all a very speedy recovery as well. Are there any further apologies that I might have missed there? Just checking. No, I think we've got everyone accounted for. Fourth item is obviously declarations of interest, and that's just for me to remind everyone of their obligations to declare, and I can see Lindsay's indicating accordingly.
Yeah, just for transparency, I've checked with the monitoring officer. I need to declare an interest on item number 9. just in respect of my partner's employment as a train guard for TransPennine Express and as a member of RMT Union.
Lovely, that's great. Thanks for that, Lindsay, and we'll make sure that's recorded accordingly. But obviously, if there's any other declarations that anyone becomes aware of during the course of the meeting, please don't hesitate to indicate so we can record it accordingly. If I move to item number 5, we've got the minutes of the last meeting. And can I move that the minutes of the last meeting that was held on the 4th of March be approved as a correct record, if that is agreed? Superb, and I will put my autograph onto those as a correct record accordingly. Okay. The 6th item is Liverpool City Region Combined Authority Constitution, committee terms of reference and membership for 2021-22, and Jill, as our Chief Legal and Monitoring Officer, is going to take us through this.
Thank you, Chair. There are a number of recommendations contained in the report, some of which the Chair has already alluded to, in relation to councillors who've served on the committee but are no longer with us, and welcoming the new councillors. So those deals with recommendations A to C. In respect to the following recommendations, recommendation G, we've got a recommendation regarding the responsibility for functions which are set out in Appendix 1. So councillors who are new to the committee are asked to pay particular attention to that and make sure that you're familiar with them. Any questions on those functions and responsibilities, the Democratic team or myself are happy to help you. In relation to recommendation E, it's just to note in relation to standing orders about the Constitution, and again that's set out in Appendix 2, the requirement for meetings to be held in person, hence we're all here today, and obviously that's changed as a result of the government guidance. Recommendation F just notes which code of conduct you are subject to whilst you are here in this committee. You remain subject to your home authority's code of conduct. And recommendation G also sets out the position in relation to lead members, and that's detailed in paragraph 3.3 of the report.
Lovely, thanks for that, Jill. Are there any questions that anyone wants to ask of Jill accordingly? If not, I'll move the recommendations that are on page 7 and 8, and also just reference, because paragraph 3.3 mentions the appointment of lead members. For completeness, I'll read out the lead members that we were going to propose, but we'll obviously follow this up in writing with Democratic Services, that we're going to ask Councillor John Stockton to lead on bus, Councillor Gordon Friel to lead on rail and freight, Councillor Ken McGlashan to lead on ferries, Councillor Steve Fowkes to lead on transport finance, Councillor Natalie Nicholas to lead on active travel tunnels and the key route network, and Councillor Nina Killen to lead on customer and smart ticketing. But if I can move all of the recommendations that you will find on pages 7 and 8 on the report, if that is agreed.
Is it seconded?
Excellent, well done. If we move on to item number 7 then, it's the cycle of meetings, spokespersons and appointments to outside bodies for 2021-22, and Jill is going to take us through this report.
Thank you, Chair. Again, the report contains a number of recommendations for members' consideration. In relation to this report, you've got the report information setting out the dates of the Transport Committee for the forthcoming municipal year set out in Appendix 1. It's also got determination of the representations in the outside body, which is set out in Appendix 2, which we ask you to consider and advise. Appointments for the spokespersons to each of the constituent local authorities, which again is set out in Appendix 2. And then the final recommendation, recommendation D, is to note the continuing appointments of the Combined Authority Chair in relation to the Transport Committee, who will represent the authority on transport for the North Partnership Board, and a substitute member and the Rail North Committee membership there. And then, the final recommendation is to also note that the appointment of the Chair of the Transport Committee has been co-opted onto the Combined Authority as the portfolio holder for transport and air quality. So there are a couple of those recommendations to revisit, Chair, in relation to the nominations, and those are set out in paragraph 3.2.
Wonderful, thanks, Jill. And just for completeness from regards from the Labour group, the nominees we would move for the Travel Safe Board are Councillor Joe Pearson as Chair and Councillor Anthony Lavelle as Vice Chair. In terms of West Coast 250, Councillor Gordon Friel as lead member for Rail and Freight. Rail North Committee substitute member, Councillor Gordon Friel as the lead member for Rail and Freight. And for the Transport for the North Scrutiny Committee, we would propose Councillor Lindsay Mealy as the member and Councillor Sean Halsall as the alternate. So that was the nominations from the Labour group. Obviously, the opposition will be able to nominate who they wish for the Travel Safe Board equally. If there's no further contributions, can we move all of those recommendations accordingly? Excellent. Okay, let's move on to, now we've dealt with a lot of the procedural and constitutional stuff, let's get stuck into some transport stuff. And I have to say that item number 8, with my self-confessed anorak on my back, is something that gets me very, very, very excited, because it's titled Independently Powered Electric Multiple Unit, brackets Battery Powered Train Trial. And David Powell, who's our rolling stock director, is going to give us what I think is going to be a pretty exciting and visionary presentation about not just our brand new trains, but the way that they are leading the rail industry in this country and have the potential to go not just on the Merseyrail network as they will, but significantly further beyond the terms of the Merseyrail network as a key part of Steve Rotherham's vision of Merseyrail for all across the city region. So, David, over to you.
Is that it? Is that on? That's better, isn't it? Right, apologies. Okay, a little bit of background, and apologies, the railway industry is full of horrible acronyms. I'll try and keep it as simple as I can. I think you're all aware that we're in the process of getting ready to introduce our new fleet of trains. Originally, we ordered 52 of the new units. They're called Class 777s from Stadler. That was back in 2017. And we have options to procure up to another 60. When we were designing the business case and the procurement, we knew that the potential to expand the network was a clear aspiration. So we baked that into our contracts with our suppliers. We exercised the first part of the option last year, and we ordered an additional 1 unit. So the fleet is now going to be 53. And that is to enable the expansion of the network to include Headbolt Lane, the station that we're intending to build beyond Kirby. So that was great to be able to do that. And that plays very much into the decision making about battery-powered trains. We've had this in mind for a long time. We know that the current trains as they're coming, they're all third rail trains. That's what the Merseyrail network is. They're powered by the third rail. But we deliberately designed and specified the train so that we could either fit equipment to work with overhead wires, 25,000 volts up in the sky, or potentially to have new technology that's been coming into the industry bit by bit, emerging, and that's using onboard energy storage, which typically, and in our case, that would be batteries. And that's where this horrible acronym, the IPEMU, comes from. So apologies for that, but that is what in the industry we call them. It means an independently powered electric multiple unit, a battery-powered train that can go beyond the third rail. So the technology itself, I'm sure you're all aware, battery technology has moved on a lot in recent years, driven not by the rail industry, but driven by mobile phones and automotive and all sorts of other applications. And the rail industry is beginning to take advantage of that. But the technology is novel. So what we're looking at, we would be certainly the first fleet of this nature in England, possibly in the UK, and there aren't that many others of these around the world. So this puts us technically in a very pioneering place, us considering what we're going to do with this opportunity. Okay, but the industry has changed a lot. These things are a lot more viable. Batteries are more powerful, they're smaller, they can have a longer life, and the cost of batteries has come down a lot over recent years. So I guess the challenge we had is, are we able to take advantage of that? That was the question we were asking ourselves. If I can have the next slide, please. Okay, so you might ask, what's the benefit of this? There are basically three benefits of a battery-powered train over the conventional train powered by the third rail. So the first one, and probably the most obvious one, is it can go beyond the third rail. We could put it into passenger service and expand the network. But there's another real tangible benefit which gives a great deal to the business rationale for why we might want to do this, and that's energy recycling. These trains can be a lot more energy efficient. It's not dissimilar to what goes on with some of the hybrid cars that you get. When you brake, you put your energy into the battery rather than it all burning off into the atmosphere. And then when you start to accelerate again, you can use the energy that you've put into the battery. That gives you a financial saving. It also would reduce the carbon footprint of running the railway quite significantly. And then the final benefit is a safety benefit, which means that a train fitted with this technology, if it got stranded between two stations and the third rail was isolated, which can happen. It doesn't happen frequently, but it can happen. Normally in those circumstances, you'd have to detrain the passengers to get out the train and walk down the infrastructure, which is not great. It's not what you want people to be doing. A train with the battery pack on it would be able to move under its own power to the next station and get the passengers off in the conventional way, through the doors, rather than through the end of the train. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is a photo from underneath a train, a place I sort of hang out a bit, I'm afraid. Got strange choices, but this is the space that we created. So when I talked about us specifying this is a space that underneath one of the end cars on the unit, where that space could be filled either with the equipment to run with overhead wires, which would be a big transformer and a rectifier, or alternatively where we could put the battery equipment. So this was all designed in from when we specified the train back a long time ago. Okay, next slide, please. Right, so the trial, we had this in mind. So this idea has been floating around. I know I've spoken to quite a few of you at various times over the years about the idea. We decided it was time to see if the idea could be made a reality. So the criteria that we set, we wanted to see, can this be a viable technical proposition, but also does it make sense from a financial perspective as well? Those were the two key criteria we set ourselves. We worked with our colleagues on the Transforming Cities Fund and secured a package of funding from within there to undertake the trial. As you can see, it's a chunky sum of money, but I hope you're going to draw the same conclusion I have, that I think we've invested our money well. So we worked with Stadler. They've got some pedigree of doing similar things in other parts of the world, most notably the Netherlands and Germany and a little bit in Switzerland, and had a look at what technologies they had available. We set ourselves a set of success criteria for the trial. So the first one is it technically feasible? Basically, does it work? That's pretty basic. How far do we think realistically trains of this nature could go? There's a lot of stuff out in the railway press. If you read it, there are all sorts of people who are making all sorts of claims, none of which I put a great deal of faith in. They're normally written by people who are trying to sell you something. We are very much not in that mode. We're in a world of we want to use something out there in the real world. So statements I will make about range will be deliberately conservative. I won't overstate. And we're always looking at what the range would be for the battery at the end of its life. It's quite different. Batteries do wear out, as you all know. They do degrade over time. But what do we think is a reasonable range that we could get one of these trains to go beyond the third rail? How does it perform? How well does it accelerate? How well does it brake? On many of the routes we'd be looking at replacing diesel-powered trains, which are not as powerful as our electric trains. We've been testing whether these can behave as though they are still an electric train on the third rail. And I'll give you some results in a bit. Absolutely key to this is how long do we think the batteries would last. The economics of this are very, very dependent on how frequently you would have to change the batteries. They're not cheap. How would we get regulatory approval? Because these are not yet in service anywhere in the UK. There are trams in Birmingham, by the way, so it's not unknown. And we actually found, we spent quite a bit of time talking to the Office of Road and Rail, who are very relaxed about this, actually. I found them to be extremely amenable and very practical, which was good. And then how much money would we save? We talked about the idea of recycling braking energy. How much would that save in terms of money and carbon? And then the timeframes that we were working within, the Headbolt Lanes scheme is also funded by Transforming Cities, and that fund runs until early 2023. So the view is, could we get this done and implemented and actually into service within that time frame? So that was another test for us. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the trial unit. Yep. The little inset photograph is what the equipment looks like. I'm afraid it's not very interesting. It looks like a load of black boxes because on the outside that's what it is. But there are basically 3 units. There's one that's full of batteries, one that's a cooling system to manage the temperature of the batteries, which is the key to giving them good life and good performance. And then there's an equipment case full of power electronics, a traction converter, which we've already got 3 of those on the train. We need a 4th one to control the batteries. The trial unit itself, so you'll hear me talk about the trial unit, and I'll also be referring to a serial unit. I'll tell you about the difference between those is the trial one is effectively, consider it to be a prototype. It's smaller than the one that we would actually go for if we were to proceed with this technology. And the key difference is the amount of energy stored in the batteries. So the units are kilowatt hours. So the trial unit has got two lots of 69 kilowatt hour batteries. The serial unit would be over twice the size and would have 2 times 160 kilowatt hours, gives you a better range, gives you a better life. And a large part of what we were doing, once we got beyond the basic does it work part of the exercise, was to see how good Stadler's simulations were, to verify how accurate they are, because that's where we're taking our predictions of life and predictions of range from their computer simulations. So this we spent over a year getting this designed, getting it manufactured, and it was a great pleasure to go back to Switzerland for the first time in well over a year in April, to actually witness the static testing of this before it came over to Liverpool. I actually got to drive it as well, which was quite good fun. A bit scary because the test track was 200 metres long and there was a public road at the end of it. So the brakes worked fine, don't worry. No, it was really, really good to see that. Stadler performed particularly well during this phase. They were really focused. We focused them, but they responded the right way. I was pleased. And then the train made its way over to us, and over the course of May and June, we've had it running around on the Merseyrail network at night, I'm afraid. Well, the key thing at the bottom there is all the functionality was successfully tested. So the does it work question, the answer is yes, it worked. It worked really, really well. There was very, very little adjustment that we needed to make, so that was really gratifying. Next slide, please. Okay, so having a look at some of the service runs. This was a big one. So most of the testing we did, we used the Southport route because it's one of our longer routes. It's also quite close to the depot at Kirkdale. And the simulations showed that, so it's 17 miles long, and we were running up and down that on the battery, stopping at every one of the stations. So that's simulating a real-world scenario. And remember, this trial unit is less than half the size of the one that we would actually go for. It did it absolutely successfully, no problems. We were really pleased. So the range we were getting in anticipation ahead of the simulation. So some of the stats on the little table, the simulation said that if you started with 90% of battery charge, ran up to Southport, you'd end up with minus 4% battery charge. So I don't quite know what that means, but there you go. You've zapped the battery. It wouldn't get there. The reality was we got there and there was still 22% left in the battery, which we were really, really pleased at. And the timing, absolutely to the second. So it performed like an electric multiple unit. It's not like a slower diesel train. This was driving like a normal 777. So that was really, really pleasing. And we did that quite a few times. This wasn't just a one-off. We were doing it night after night. Okay, next slide, please. This is about braking. This is about energy recovery. We're just trying to measure, and again, we were really, really pleased with the results. They were a little bit better than what we were expecting from the simulation work. So to give you some headline figures, a regular Class 777 consumes just over 13 kilowatt hours per mile. Regenerative braking is a feature of our new trains, which we're going to get this anyway. That's a benefit, but it only works when you've got lots of the same type of train running on the network. So we haven't got that yet. We're only running them one at a time. Takes it down to just over 11 kilowatt hours per mile. But with the IPMU, we're anticipating that we'll get below 9 kilowatt hours per mile. So those numbers are already, the existing trains are somewhere around about 15, 16 kilowatt hours per mile. So the IPMU is consuming a lot less electricity than the old trains, and it makes the new trains considerably better than they would be without the batteries. Again, we were really pleased with these results. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's turn to the serial design, which is the what would we do if we were to go for this? If the trials are all passed so far, I'm hoping you're picking up the theme that we're getting good results from our trials. So as I said before, we want to go for a larger one. Our view is if we're going to go for it, let's have one that can enable us to really expand our network. Let's push the boundaries. Let's see how far we can get. We've had the vision from the long-term rail strategy and from the Metro Mayor's manifesto with the ambition to see the Merseyrail network expand considerably, which is great to have that ambition. So our vision was what can we do? How can we push this technology to with the limit of what we can do on a 65-metre long train? So sorry for the acronyms in the second bullet point. The key one in there is RA3. This is the axle load of the train. So we've got to keep the axle load below 16.5 tonnes to remain compliant with Network Rail's infrastructure. That's been the engineering challenge. We've pushed it right to the limit with what we've done with this, and it's looking good. So our view, as you see, the smaller one comfortably did 17 miles. The larger one actually could go an awful lot longer than 20 miles, but I've used this term realistic range, which reflects a train that is maybe been in service for 10 years. The batteries are to some extent degraded. They will degrade over time, and it's full of passengers. So we feel comfortable that one of these trains can travel 20 miles comfortably using its battery, and 20 miles gets you quite a long way. We also have identified a principle of how we could extend the range beyond that, so to go further. And this would involve building some infrastructure. So typically this would be a short section of third rail at normally, say, a station, where the train would stop, maybe dwell a little bit longer than the normal 30 seconds, but we're only talking, say, a minute or so, put its shoes down, charge the battery up. So we did a lot of testing of how quickly you can charge the batteries up. Really good results, very, very happy with that. So we could have intermediate locations where we could charge going down the route. So in many ways, we think the range is we could go as far as we wanted to. So that's good news. Sorry, Gordon? I'll do questions at the end if that's all right, Gordon. We think this is really well aligned with the routes that have been identified in the long-term rail strategy and in the Metro Mayor's manifesto. There's some very, very clear ambition there, and I think this technology is going to enable us to fulfil those ambitions. So we did a bit of business work, as well as sort of doing all the engineering type stuff, which was great and successful. We also generated financial business cases of how much would it cost to replace the batteries, how often do you have to do it. And we picked 3 very different routes. Well, one of them is an extension of the other, but the first one is possibly the shortest extension we might consider. That's the Headbolt Lane scheme, just over 1 kilometre beyond Kirby. We then took the next step beyond Headbolt Lane if we were to continue to Skelmersdale, which is a scheme that's been in the offing and potentially in the pipeline for quite a while. And then we took on what is probably the most difficult of the routes that we could take on, which is running the whole length of the Wirral and down into North Wales. So going from Bidston up at the top end of, well, just down the road from here, and making it down to Wrexham. So those were deliberately 3 very different characteristic routes, and we wanted to see what we thought the financial implications of taking those routes on would look like. Okay, a little bit of work on battery life. I'll come back into the financials in a minute. A lot of simulation work. ABB are that's a company, a Sia Brown Bovey. They're the people who do the traction equipment on board the train. A lot of smart work. They've got a lot of experience of doing this type of work, and we were looking to get their simulations done and verified with our trials. We got results that absolutely delighted us. So the 2 headlines are: Headbolt Lane is actually quite easy. It's not very far. The train drops back onto the third rail. You can manage the battery nice and easily on a route like that. We reckon we can get over 15 years life out of the batteries, which is better than we were anticipating. That was good. I was going to be pleased with an answer of over 10. We got over 15. And on the most difficult route, we've actually got a prediction that we could get a 10-year battery life out of that. So it still has to run on the third rail. So it would be a service from Liverpool Central, often over to the Wirral, up to Bidston, and then go unelectrified all the way down to Wrexham and come back. So again, we were getting really good, better results than we were anticipating from the trial. Okay, so a little bit about the 3 routes. Let's have a look. What have I not told you? I guess the The third row is about charging infrastructure. So our view is that a short route like Headbolt Lane, we wouldn't need to put a charging point at Headbolt Lane. We can comfortably get to Headbolt Lane and come back, no problem. If we were going to go to Skelmersdale, we could go there and back without, but our view is you'd probably want to put a charging point at Skelmersdale because you might want to start a service there in the morning, so you might want to charge a train up overnight. So in the business case, we put charging infrastructure in there. And then on the Bidston to Wrexham route, to make the Liverpool Central to Wrexham service, we estimated that we'd put a charging point at Wrexham, and to be safe, we put in the business case the cost for putting 2 other interim points. But it proves the point, we can make this thing go a long way. So the business case results, Headbolt Lane, unsurprising, that was the weakest. It was marginal as to whether we were comparing if you had the cost of third rail versus the cost of the batteries. Our business case is a 35-year life cycle, which is the life of the trains. The result was marginal. As soon as you get into the longer routes, there's a lot more saving on the infrastructure. Building third rail is expensive. So it was a strong case for Skelmersdale, over the life of the trains, tens of millions of pounds better off. And when you go onto the longest route, off into North Wales, the equivalent result is hundreds of millions of pounds better off. So financially, this is a good choice for us in terms of expanding our network. Next slide, please. So, the summary of the trial. It works. The functionality was successfully demonstrated. The battery life predictions are better than we had anticipated. Really, really pleasing about that. We think we've got a sensible view on range. It's probably a bit conservative, but I don't want to overstate and then run the risk of under-delivering for you. So we'll learn a lot more of this once we get into actually owning these assets. We've developed a business case for Headbolt Lane that enabled a decision to be made, and then the business case gets stronger and stronger with the longer routes. Really, really pleasing. So all in all, lots of good news coming out of this. Next slide, please. Nearly reached the question slide, Gordon. Then I'm all yours. Future expansion possibilities. Well, I had a bit of fun one morning with one of my colleagues. We started to try and started drawing lines on the map. So I think most of you will recognise that's the existing rail network. The green lines are the Wirral lines with the third rail, and the blue line is the northern line with the third rail. So we thought about what the art of the possible would be. I had the long-term rail strategy under one elbow and Steve's manifesto under the other, and thought, right, where could we get to? So if we run around the map, up at the top, Preston, going beyond Ormskirk, is within range. There's the possibility that you could run to Southport if the Burscough curve was reinstated. That could be done with a battery-powered train. I haven't connected the city lines in, otherwise I'd have just turned every line on the whole map pink, to be honest with you. So I didn't do that. But in the long-term future, who knows? If we look at going beyond Kirby, we've obviously got Headbolt Lane as our first destination. There's the possibility of the spur up to Skelmersdale, and I would say Wigan is a very realistic destination. That's where the railway runs to at the moment. We could replace or replicate the service that's currently run by Northern with a much better train that runs a lot faster. Going beyond Hunt's Cross, you're heading off in the direction of Warrington. Again, at some point you have to curtail your ambition. I took us through to Birchwood. I thought it was a realistic destination. I'm not sure at what point we get into Greater Manchester. I guess Wigan is just in Greater Manchester, but it looks like we're converging on Manchester from all angles at this point. My former colleagues at TFGM will be delighted to meet me again. Beyond Ellesmere Port, again, we can start to head in towards Halton, which was great. So through Helsby and Frodsham in Cheshire, and then getting ourselves into Halton, which is good. With the possibility, I came up with Widnes, Runcorn East as a possible destination. We could possibly even connect up and go up to Warrington. They don't view this as a limitation. This is to give you a flavour of what we could do. Beyond Chester, we could possibly run to Crewe, enable us to connect up to HS2. That would facilitate access for people who live on the Wirral, I think, rather than going through the Liverpool city centre necessarily. And then the big one is the line I've already spoken to you about, down into North Wales, getting to Wrexham from Bidston. So that's what the art of the possible looks like, in our opinion. And we would have to. Each one of those projects in itself is a big project. It's more than just buying some battery-powered trains and off you go. But you know, we stand ready to start work on developing business cases for these ambitions. Okay, next slide, please. So current status, where are we up to? We're just finalising the documentation of the test results. I had a scribble on the final report yesterday evening. All looking good, really good, independently verified by our consulting engineers, and we're looking in good shape. Formal decision on whether we take the plunge and actually go for this. So this has been done within Mersey Travel on the basis of making a choice for Headbolt Lane as the first application. And in principle, the view is it's a goer. We should be doing this. And I'm just in the process of finalising the negotiations with Stadler for converting 7 of our fleet of 53 trains to become IP here EMUs. And that would then make sure that we can get those delivered in time to serve the Headbolt Lane route. So getting ready to instruct Stadler, and similarly instructing Network Rail, Tony, my colleague sitting over there, who's managing the Headbolt Lane projects. What a lot of this is about saving the money on not putting the third rail in. So Tony has asked Network Rail to stop work on that because we don't need the third rail. And then I think there's an opportunity to relook at the long-term rail strategy. It's a very good document, very well developed over the years. I was around for. I'm not the author of it, but I was around for a lot of it. But it was went through its iterations in 2018. I think this is an ideal trigger for us to re-examine that and have a look at what the art of the possible is. And at that point, I'll go on to Gordon's favourite slide and invite any questions.
Gordon, you going first, mate?
Yes,
Whilst
please.
anyone else who wants to indicate can, Natalie.
In the extension of the third rail, you probably just answered that with Tony, because I thought the DFT was opposed to any extension of third rail.
It's the Office of Road. It's not the DFT. It's the Office of Road.
Office of Road and Rail.
Microphone. It's the Office of Road and Rail who are the safety authority, and they are not. They are certainly not keen on it. They have this notion that 750 volts round about the height of your ankle is rather dangerous, and it is. You know, people do get electrified on the rail. It's not a frequent occurrence, but it can happen. They will certainly scrutinise any decision that anybody makes to try to extend third rail very, very heavily, and we would avoid having to go through that challenge if we were to go with the battery-powered train. They were really amenable about that. It was great, actually, for talking to the relevant railway inspector, who was totally unfazed by what we were proposing. His view, basically, is there aren't standards specifically written for this, but all trains have batteries on them anywhere. This is just a much larger battery. Apply the same rules and the same logic and the same standards, and off you go.
So if I can ask that work stopped then. I'm glad to know that one.
On the third rail for Headbolt Lane.
The third rail's finished, as far as we're
Tony,
concerned.
yes, I think so. Yep.
No, that's it. It's probably quite surprising to know how much cost there is in infrastructure terms, and this is a big saver on the infrastructure.
Yep.
One of the future developments maybe with the battery is to be able to have a replacement battery at some point in time, where I don't know how long it takes to physically manoeuvre the battery into a train and out of a train, you know, so maybe that's something in the future that will be able to come. But I think this is going to I think you described it to me, David, as not just being a national story of great importance in the rail industry, but a global one. And
could be.
Well done to the team.
Thank you, Gordon.
Thanks, Gordon. I've got Ken, Natalie, John and Tommy. So, Ken.
Thanks, Chairman. Thanks very much, David, again for the excellent update and presentation. It's more of a comment than a question, Chair, but, you know, going back to when we were a transport authority from Hatton Garden, we started this process. You know, we appointed you because you know about trains, which I don't think we've appointed the wrong person, because you've done a wonderful job since you've been there. Well done. And not only that, but you've kept us up to date. I mean, as this committee changes, each and every one of us has been kept up to date by you, how we're going and how the money was spent. And I think what we're here for, as we are now, the city region, we're here to deliver transport, affordable transport for our people out there, because we're all in the people business. There are constituents, also customers, but once this hits the ground, I mean, the rest of the country can only just take note and be jealous of what we at Mersey Travel have achieved. The first company to be owned by the public, by ourselves. We own this. We don't rent it off the fat cats who rent the trains off who are 40 and 50-year-old, but this will be the brand new set, and it will serve our people very well for many, many years to come. Dave, your team, well done. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Thanks, Ken. Natalie?
Thank you, Chair. David, it's good to see you. It's always exciting when you bring a presentation to us. So in 2015, in Essex, they did the retrofitting class 379 of the same IPEMU. I don't know how to pronounce the acronym, but in terms of what can we learn from Essex, in terms of now we have the 777, so obviously it's upgraded, but is there anything we can learn from it? And if, you mentioned that some retrofitting is going to take place again so that we can learn from it, despite already a great first run. Thanks.
Thanks, Natalie. Well researched. Yes, you're right. And yes, I know all about what they were doing down in Essex. They had a different rationale with what they were doing. So I actually know the project manager. It was a Network Rail run project. They converted a Bombardier Electrostar, and their vision was, can we get this thing up to 100 miles an hour? And they succeeded. The project manager came and actually I invited him up to our building in the aftermath of having achieved that to present to us. So part of what they did in Essex was part of the genesis of what we're doing here. So there's a direct translation. I also happen to know where all those batteries are. They're at Long Marsden, underneath a Viva rail train. So I've had a good kick of the tyres on them. So we have the industry is quite a helpful, friendly place. We do borrow learning from each other. So yeah, that project in Essex was very, very helpful to us. It planted a seed of what could be done in a lot of people's minds. I think the disappointment for a lot in the industry is that it's taken this long for anybody to actually grasp the nettle and crack on and do it. Although I do have to say our colleagues at Transport for Wales, we're running in parallel with them. We're talking to them as well. They've got Stadler rolling stock coming, which will also have the same battery technology on it as ours. But well done in your research, absolutely right.
Brilliant. John?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, David, for your comprehensive presentation. I'm pleased to hear that you know about trains. That was a good appointment, obviously. So, thank you very much for that. The serious question I've got is, I seem to recall that the actual amount of money for this project was something like 400 million, correct me if I'm wrong. Was it something like that, 400 million? 470, was it? Higher? I just want to know, really, is it coming in on budget, and are we meeting our budget targets, and how's that going? And finally, just a compliment like Ken, basically. Thank you very much for bringing this project over the line, literally and metaphorically. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. Yeah, the overall budget of the programme is of the order of £500 million. It's a bit of a tale of two halves in terms of how well it's going. All of the works that we have commissioned directly ourselves and placed the orders for, all of those are coming in on budget, absolutely. Where we have more challenge is when we're working with Network Rail. The type of contract we end up with Network Rail is what's called an emerging cost contract. And they can be quite challenging. It's a situation we've faced on some of the other schemes as well. So keeping control of Network Rail's costs is sometimes a little bit challenging. That keeps me busier financially than managing Stadler, for example. I mean, a great example, one I'm very pleased with. We were at Kirkdale Depot. I know quite a few of you have been down to Kirkdale Depot. We delivered that project, done and dusted, commissioned, it's handed over, it's accepted. We did that, and we had £100,000 to spare in the budget by the end. So that's a really good example but that was us directly letting the words to the contractor. We do have some challenges with Network Rail, I'm afraid.
Tommy?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dave. Brilliant presentation. I'm a bit new to all this, so forgive me for just asking this question. I live in Kirby, and Headboat Lane Station, which we're all looking forward to, great anticipation, is a mile from Kirby Station. So is the business case for Headboat Lane going to be dependent on the extension being given to Skelmersdale? Because it's just a short distance from Kirby Station to Headboat Lane Station, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, that's a great question, so thank you. And sorry about all the horrible acronyms. I tried to keep it in English. No, the business case work that we've done is specific to Headboat Lane, so it's a decision that stands up to scrutiny in its own right. We would then, if the project to go beyond Headboat Lane to Skelmersdale was taken, that would have to have its own business case work done. But I think it became abundantly clear to us with the results we've had that the right choice for that would be to have the train powered by battery rather than spending tens of millions of pounds on third rail to cover that route. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tommy. Are there any other questions? Lindsay and then Anthony.
I'm sorry if this is already being covered, but I was just wondering, you know, when the batteries are recharged, will they be getting recharged with clean energy, or is it just like off the grid?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
Sorry. So about when the batteries are being recharged, would it be off the grid energy, or would it be clean energy and renewable energy?
Okay, good question. So they would be recharged just by putting what are called the shoes down. This is what normally touches the third rail when the train's running normally. So it would be being drawn from the power stations as normal. It just gets its electricity from the national grid. So it's not specifically clean energy that powers the railway. But railways do consume a lot less electricity than other ways of shifting large numbers of people.
Would there be any scope for us to look into getting the energy from renewable energy for them? Or?
In principle, yes. There are ways in which it could be done. There's a company who I'm aware of who are promoting the idea that you could have a solar-powered substation that was connected to the railway. The idea is nice. I like it. And the academics behind it went to the same university as me, so they can't be wrong. So yes, potentially there are ideas, but that's not specifically what I've been presenting here. But yeah, we want to get our carbon footprint down.
Brilliant. Thanks, Anthony, and then Chris.
Thank you, Chair. I think if the UK economy is to be rebalanced and the prosperity of the city region be increased, then I think this will play a vital role in that, and especially with the prospect of the potential of us reaching as far as Crewe and connecting to the London line. I just think, though a query around the battery, but on a different angle, is if the trial run and the simulation was so different, then you've reassured me on putting in charges along the route in the event that the simulation does become a reality. My question is, what are the knock-on effects to the service overall if the trains do have to stop to be recharged along the way in that eventuality?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, excellent question. So let's take the most difficult route, the Bidston to Wrexham one. So the trains would travel from Liverpool Central over to the Wirral on the third rail. At Bidston, they would then turn left, basically, and start to run down the electrified infrastructure. Typically, we're envisaging that you would need 2 locations en route, and the train a typical what's called dwell time, that's how long a train stays at a station for. On Merseyrail, almost every station is 30 seconds, and it's a metro-type service. So if we extended that same logic down the Bidston-Wrexham line, we would probably have to dwell for, I would say, around about a minute at a couple of stations. So you'd lengthen your dwell a little bit. But remember, these trains go from A to B a lot more quickly than the existing trains. So the overall journey time down to Wrexham would be a lot less than it is now. I wouldn't, at this stage, like to say definitively that it would be less than an hour from the centre of Liverpool to Wrexham, but it's going to be roundabout. It's that order of magnitude. It's a real benefit. And obviously there are a lot of people in the Liverpool City region live along that route as well. And then typically your battery would be relatively well discharged, but to make sure it works correctly, we need to keep it above 20%. If you start going down below 20%, you start killing the life of the battery. So it fluctuates between 80 and 20%. When you get down to Wrexham, typically, when the train turns round, typically they dwell for a lot longer, typically around about 10 minutes. And that gives us the chance, that's long enough to get our battery charge back up to 80%. So we think it would be of very limited visibility to passengers. I don't think it would disadvantage them. And then the big advantage, electric trains accelerate and brake at a much faster rate. And these trains, the 777, it's a very, very powerful train for its size. They really do go for it. They're like metro trains, which is, so I think we'd get a real journey time benefit, even if we did have to charge up a little bit longer at intermediate points.
Brilliant. Chris?
Well, yeah, thanks. So I've just got a few fairly simple, naive questions. I'm new to this committee, hope you don't mind. The thrust of your discussion just now is about the technology of the trains and extending lines, as I understood it. Because I've noticed this is done in quite a few cities. They're always adding stations further along the line, going further and further outwards in different directions. So, and I'm just wondering if there's any scope for example, I've come today from Prenton, Wirral. I had to get a bus to the bus station to get the train here. Once I got the train, it was great. It was 17 minutes from Conway Park to New Brighton. That's pretty good. So I suppose one question is, any scope for getting another station near where I am, so I don't have to go 2 miles to the nearest station. One is, when you get the new stations online, the new trains, what would be the likely reduction in journey time? And I'm not complaining at 70 minutes. That's great through 6 stations already, I think, because I've said before about buses. I don't think most people are that bothered about cutting 1 or 2 minutes off journey times on the whole. It's being connected, from one means of transport to the other. The other one is just out of interest. Looking at that train there, it reminds me of the one I've just been on. How old would that train be that I was on from Conway Park to New Brighton? 40, 50 years? I don't know. And I think that's it, really. If that's all right, just 3 or 4 naive questions.
No, they're not naive at all.
Yeah.
They're very good questions. So thank you for those, and welcome to the committee. I'm trying to think. So to serve Prenton, if the Borderlands line, the one that runs from Bidston to Wrexham, was made part of the Merseyrail network, I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think where the nearest station to Prenton is on that route. Does anybody who knows that route a bit better than me know? Yeah, and I know that in the Metro Mayor's manifesto, there's a new station on that route. Is it Woodchurch, I think? Yeah. So in principle, I mean, what we want to do is we want to have stations located near where people live and work, and people will use the railway. So there are schemes in hand at the moment being delivered to actually increase the number of stations. Headbolt Lane is a good example of that, and there are others that potentially could serve Prenton better. Journey time reduction. The headline figure is that we're delivering an at least 10% journey time reduction with the new train, because it basically is more powerful, and we're investing money in the power infrastructure as well. So it's going to be quite noticeable, particularly on the longer routes, that you're going to save a few minutes at the end of your day. And then the age of the trains, well, that one there, that's a new one. So that's one of the replacements. That actually that's the IPMU prototype. That's Unit 2. So that's about a year old. But the ones that you've been riding on now, the earliest ones were built in 1978. They were built at the tail end of the 70s, so they're over 40 years old now. I have to say, they're in good nick given their age. They've served us very, very well, but they are
Absolutely, yeah.
They are at the end of their life.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, David. If there's no further questions or comments, I'll wrap up first with a question, then sort of a little bit of comment from myself. Look, I think that's a thing of beauty. I think it's wonderful on so many different levels. I'm very conscious, because we have got a number of kind of new members that are joining us this year. Is there the ability perhaps to get some of our new members, but actually everyone, when the time is right regarding the pandemic, to actually go and visit one of the units at Kirkdale? Because when you go and see it up close, and when you can actually get on the thing, it's not just how it looks outside, but you genuinely kind of are looking at something that is as good as anything you'll find on this planet on the rail network. And that's exactly what our public deserve at the end of the day. So if we can think about what we can organise, perhaps a few months' time when hopefully kind of everything with the pandemic is really settling down as we all hope. So that was the kind of question. But the comment that I'll kind of finish off is that, look, this is something that's I think is really, really exciting. I completely agree with all the points that Ken and others have made about how great David and the team are. I'm particularly pleased about that because I chaired the appointment panel that gave him the job. So if you weren't happy, I genuinely would be the one to blame for all of that. But when we've gone through this project over many, many years, we've started off with lots of great ideas. Could it be level access to the platform? Could it be designed by the passengers? Could we be smart about how we maintain the same number of seats as we've got today in a way that the passengers want, but we get more space? Could we make sure we look at it being lighter so it causes less wear and tear on the track, it uses less energy, it becomes greener? And could we go through and literally tick reality? And where it gets really, really, really exciting is when we look at that map that you put up about where potentially these trains could travel to. And you're completely right, these would be huge projects, but these things start to become projects that genuinely we can deliver. And this is a great example of how devolution doesn't just work, it's the right thing to do. Being that frankly wouldn't cut all those different items I've just mentioned we've been able to tick off. And we would be much further down the queue to trial anything like this. The fact that we, as a city region, the city region that pioneered the passenger rail network globally, when we think about Edge Hill Station, are actually leading the industry again in this country, is something we should all be damn proud of, because we have done that, and particularly David and his team have led all of that. So I think the presentation and all the kind of things we've heard genuinely deserves a very warm, hearty round of applause. And we look forward to bringing David back for further updates over the coming weeks and months.
Thank you. No, you'll have that as well. And I'll have to say, it would be an absolute pleasure to, let's organise it and invite you all, come and have a look up close and personal, what we've been working on for years.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Excellent. Let's move on to item number 9 then, still talking trains. Perhaps less positively though, is the Williams-Shapps plan for rail. And I think Tony's going to take us through this report. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. Tony Killen from the rail section. Unfortunately, Mal, the Assistant Director, couldn't make it today, so I'm standing in for him. Members will recall severe disruption to the rail industry that occurred with the introduction of the timetable in May 2018. And following that, the government decided to carry out an independent review that was led by a person called Keith Williams, the former Chairman and Chief Executive of British Airways. The review was to look at all aspects of the rail industry, but in particular the structure of the rail industry, to improve accountability and provide a focus to put in the passenger first. I think the output of that 2018 timetable was quite apparent. There was nobody in charge. And I think that's where this came from. So the Williams Review made good progress, and we worked and contributed to it. However, that white paper then that was going to be prepared towards the end of 2019 got delayed. And also, obviously, in 2020, we had the impact of COVID. In March 2020, the government stepped in with passengers being told to stay at home. Trains were running empty, and the government stepped in to underwrite the costs of the rail franchises, apart from our Merseyrail Electrics, which has stayed on it without any additional funding. And of course, these new agreements are now still in place. They've slightly changed, but we are still in this situation where the finances of the railway are completely different. So the Williams Review needed to be considered not only in terms of the restructure of the railway, but also to understand what the impact of COVID would be and how that would shape the future of the railways. Now, the review has been completed and has been published, and I've attached in the report in section 3.6 the link for the full report for members to go through. But what this report is just pulls out what I think are the key issues and in section 4 that's detailed. And primarily the first one is the creation of a new organisation called Great British Railways, or GBR. Now, GBR will be a merger of Network Rail and also parts of the Department for Transport and parts of the ATOC, the Association of Train Operating Companies, and elements of the Rail Delivery Group, basically pulling together the rail industry. And the intention of this change is to create a body that provides that single point of responsibility. It's termed one controlling mind for the rail sector. And the purpose of that is to try and reduce the overall complexity and fragmentation of the industry and reduce costs. So similar to what's happened in London Underground, London Transport, there'll be one body that looks after track and infrastructure and rail. So like the London Underground system, one body responds for track and infrastructure and running the trains. But what the new body will do will contract out the operation of the train services through different contracts, more management type contracts. GBR as an organisation will be pretty much based upon Network Rail structure with regional and local teams. And then the budgets and delivery responsibility will then be delegated to those local teams to deliver both the service and the infrastructure upgrades. And again, probably one of the key things is that the train operators themselves will not have any involvement in the revenue. So all the ticket sales money will go to GBR. GBR will set the timetable, collect the money, and they will then pay an operator to manage the train service to a specification put out by GBR. In terms of ourselves here in Merseytravel, paragraph 4.4, the devolved administration such as ourselves in Merseytravel will continue with our current powers. But there is an opportunity in this new structure for us to work closer with GBR to look to how we can improve services within the new city regions, and obviously the intention was for the local authorities to form partnerships with GBR. The report goes on to, Lisa, I won't go through all the details of the report, there's quite a lot of detail in there. There's 112 pages of the report, but I've tried to give a flavour about infrastructure, stations. Currently you have an unusual split where it's like a landlord-tenant between Network Rail as the landlord and the train operator as the tenant. So you sometimes have this difference of who's responsible for certain things. Certain things get painted by a train company, certain things get painted by Network Rail. The contracts never line up and we end up with canopies that don't get painted. We end up with poor areas of maintenance. And especially as train companies transfer from one to another, the station maintenance is not good. Thankfully, with our setup with Merseyrail, who have been in a long time, our stations are probably the best maintained in the country, really. They're very high quality if you compare them to some of the other unstaffed stations that are out there. So we think we can certainly improve on that and do better. And that's certainly what we've been looking to do. There's no changes in rolling stock, and we did propose when Williams did his review to look at our model where Merseytravel as the organisation bought the trains for the residents, but that hasn't been taken forward. But there is a good piece in there about freight and trying to support development of freight. Fares and commercial, as I said, fares will stay with GBR, and they will then be responsible for developing tickets. So something we have is our multimodal tickets. We need to be understanding how that's going to work so we can make sure our ticketing still stays valid and gives us that multimodal opportunities. No changes in regulation safety. The same bodies will carry forward, but whether that changes in the future, we'll wait and see. And in terms of the transition for this change, GBR, we expect it to run in like a shadow formation. I think they're starting to recruit and build its structure now. And then subject to the white paper and Acts of Parliament and the due legislation, we expect it to be come into being in 2023. So certainly in terms of next steps, I've tried to put in there a couple of points. The first one being the rail industry is really going to be financially challenged. Passenger numbers have reduced. There's been a substantial funding for the rail during the pandemic. We think there's going to be commercial pressures coming onto the rail industry to look at costs. And part of this change of the GBR is to try and reduce the fragmentation and reduce the need for all these various contracts to try and streamline, simplify, make decisions easier. But that means a big back office function that can be rationalised. So we do expect there will be changes that need to be considered. And that's one of the things the rail industry group has looked at, about how we deal with staff going through these proposals. Pleased to say in item 3.34, our Metro Mayor has actually sent a letter through to Williams-Shapps. And again, what the focus of that was to work to support this new structure and see how we as Liverpool City Region can take best advantage. I think the other point I'd just like to take in the report is just to tell you some of the risks. I think one of the concerns we've got is this new structure could become very centralised. It's a structure that's taken over track and an awful lot of the rail industry, and we just want to make sure that we as a local authority have a voice at the table and are well represented. The risk that we may end up with a very London-based organisation, and certainly in terms of we know how challenging it is getting funding for this area, to make sure that we secure the funding for this area is going to be a challenge for us. And I think the other area concerned is going to be cost savings. GBR, when it's set up, will be looking to make cost savings, and we need to be aware of that fact and make sure that we work hard to maintain and improve our services here in the North West. And so, basically, in conclusion, the government has now published its long-awaited white paper. There will be further acts of Parliament to go through before it's turned into law and new structures brought forward. But this new body will provide that one controlling mind for the rail industry. But there is potential for the Liverpool City region to work closer with Network Rail and this new GBR structure. And one of the things we're looking to do is try and work with them as a pilot programme to see how best we can work closer with their local team and look to develop a Merseyside GBR badged organisation that we can work closer with to improve services for this area. And what we'll also do, obviously it's quite a long-term process, this change, and what we'll also do is make sure we provide further reports and updates as this new GBR structure develops and as the white papers come through and as the new structure emerges. Chair.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Tony. I'm sure there'll be quite a few questions and comments, if I can see any indications. Lindsay? And then Natalie.
This is more of a comment than a question. I'm just concerned that the new GBR organisation will be tasked as driving down costs, including operational, and that there's a real risk that there'll be cuts to jobs within the industry and that there'll be an impact on pensions. I'm concerned that the decisions are being made on short-term thinking, because obviously passenger numbers have only been lower because of COVID, and we know that they're starting to increase, and I really don't think that anyone should be losing their jobs as a result of the pandemic. And, you know, at the same time, we're trying to reach zero carbon, both locally and nationally, and I think it's just really like short-term thinking to just think of it as like, oh, well, the passenger numbers are lower now.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Lindsay. I think we'd all agree with that. I think we know just how important railway careers are to our residents and to our children's futures, and we want more of those fulfilling railway jobs to be here in the future. And we know how important it is to have a fully staffed rail network. We're very proud of the fact that we've got fully staffed railway stations, for example. So all of those things we want to see continue. We don't want to see those threatened by a government reorganisation, particularly, and I'll talk about this shortly, where I believe there's other areas of the industry where it would be legitimate to squeeze out the cost that I'm not convinced the government are looking in those directions, but I'll mention that shortly. I've got Natalie and then John.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tony, for that. I have, if the committee would allow me, I have like 3 questions, comments. So if Tony, if I take you to point 4.17 in relation to the freight, I really welcome the recognition of freight, and I know Gordon is a big advocate for that because it keeps lorries off of our road and it reduces carbon footprint. So I really welcome that, and I do hope they'll build on it, because sometimes it's just mentioned, but there is no, in terms of funding in place to help with this. My concern about, you mentioned about pay an operator to manage, because what we might see, is that a failing operator where we have no control over managing basically the railway. And I remember when we had the timetable chaos, it took me 2.5 hours to get to Leeds, and most time it was stranded, and I was representing the city region to a meeting for Transport for the North. So that's my biggest concern. 4.20 ticketing app. I'm concerned that we might potentially be excluding people who are not digitally engaged, because that's the going forward what's referenced in this report here. So it's just something to, to really look at, that we don't exclude people with this way going forward. So it's great to have pay as you go, but I'm just concerned about that. In terms, from the report again, it's bringing in alignment with Transport for London, and as you rightly pointed out, we don't want it to be London-centric, and basically we don't have an input. Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. Agree once more with everything that you've mentioned there, particularly around the issue of fares and ticketing. There's no choice about this. We have to avoid a car-led recovery post-pandemic, and you ain't going to do that if you're going to price people off the railway by putting up the price of tickets and making it more difficult to actually access those tickets, as you rightfully say. Do you want to come back on those points?
Sorry, Chair. Just as one example, I tried to purchase a ticket to Peterborough, which usually return ticket for my son and myself is £68. It was £311 last weekend. So this is just an example of train providers trying to get post-COVID what they didn't have. So again, in terms of if that started already, what's going to happen going forward?
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. Tony, do you want to come back on those points?
Yeah, and I think that's why this report says the key is for us to make that lobby for our area and also the north. I would balance it by saying that what this does, it actually takes the fares away from these train operating companies. The fares would be set nationally by GB Rail. So that kind of predatory, or that sort of sharp practice, shall we say, where certain fares go up and people can feel themselves missing out on the best fare available. The intention going forward is that those fares are more flexible, but also I think one of the drivers, certainly from Williams-Shapps, was to try and introduce new fares that were more affordable. So I think they were looking at more the current type of ticketing is a timed ticket, either weekly or monthly, and that's great for commuters who use the train every day. We're expecting it going forward, the commuters may only use 1 day or 2 day a week, so they're looking for more tickets that give you journeys rather than a timed ticket. There's still some challenges on that, but I think that's what they're going to come to, which should give people better value. But you're absolutely right. It's something we'll have to be aware of to make sure that ticket prices are not ramped up to cover shortfalls elsewhere.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. John.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks so much. Thanks, Tony. Thanks for your excellent presentation. I can fully see the attractions of bringing together two and more disparate organisations under the aegis of one organisation, the GBR. But I'm wondering if this isn't just more profoundly a business case and a cost-cutting exercise rather than a really good look, root and branch look at improving customer services, improving the quality, the times, the dates, the actual punctuality of the trains, and whether it will overall improve the service, or is this just another Tory party cost-cutting exercise? Thank you.
Thanks, John. Jeanette.
Thank you for that. When you were talking about the Liverpool branch of this, do you envisage that that's what would happen? That it would be centrally run, but it would have that input from each region? So that's because at the moment we have a great disparity in what trains run on what services, and and what the delivery is like, not because of Merseyrail, because of other operators on those lines. And do you think that that will be looked at in this, or is it just cost cutting again? Will we be at the end of the line again?
Undoubtedly, and I think just looking at the industry now, there will be pressures. I think our role will be to make sure we protect our service as much as we can. But this change does give us an opportunity to influence those services. We're quite lucky in the way that we've been on the Merseyrail side, because we've been pretty much in control. We've set the ticketing, we've set the timetable, we work very closely with Merseyrail, are very successful. Now, if we can roll that out across our region to the city lines, as it were, that's something we'd like to do. And even if, and well, hopefully this change will give us that opportunity to lobby for the best interests of the residents of this area and try and promote investment and upgrade of our rail network.
Great, that's wonderful. Thanks, Tony. Gordon?
I think at this point, if you want to make a comment at the end, I was just going to say I could move the recommendation, because if we look at small d, it's got the we just request updates on the implementation of the plan. I think at this stage, it's very early days in this organisation to actually make any great assumptions about where it's going. If we talk about cost cutting's already occurring in the rail industry, because we've obviously got the infrastructure cuts that are being brought in. There's £1 billion worth of cuts here in infrastructure, which you'd be aware of, but no one said what those particular schemes will be cut. So we know from those things that things are going along. But I think, as Tony, Mr. Killen there indicated, is that this is going to be quite a complex affair. And just to look at vertical integration and those kind of things, I think, though, we can express, and I think we do express our concerns, and it's absolutely right for the employees. But I think, as we've covered it in the recommendations, I'd move those recommendations to be quite happy with that.
Yeah, thanks for that, Gordon, and we will be moving forward shortly. I'm going to comment accordingly, but I'm going to invite Chris in.
Yeah, thanks. Just a quick on this. I was talking before about integrated travel. I suppose this comes under 4.1 for access for all, stations improvement and so on. You know, I was talking about busing it and then getting the train and so on. And of course, another good combination for travel is cycling and the train. And I think that's come on quite a lot over the last few decades. And I noticed that most stations now have a secure, you know, cycle store and so on with a fob. And but there's one that doesn't. The one I just got today, it's been out of order for several months. Conway Park, unless they repaired it yesterday. I didn't look today, but probably they didn't. So I'm just wondering, you know, because that's a big off-putting factor. You know, if I'm thinking of cycling and getting the train, you know, I'm thinking, hang on a minute, I have had my bike stolen outside that very same. You know, attached it to the pillar a few years ago. I got my bike nicked. Somebody said, "Why do you get a fob?" If I'd got one then, it would have been fine. But now it's broken. It hasn't been repaired for months. So I'm just wondering, surely that's not a great expense to repair that. And why on earth is it not? Why has it been out of order for months and months? Because it's, in a sense, it's discriminatory against the people that use that station. Whereas, you know, further down the line, elsewhere it works. You know.
Well, I suppose if I may, Chris, and a really, really important point, perhaps if I can ask Tony to look into the very specifics about Conway Park and come back to you specifically, because absolutely sort of vital point. I think the other aspect that I would kind of say as well is that we completely recognise how important cycle rail is, if you like, as people actually using the bike at the start and end of their journey. So much so, in the project David has been leading, we've just been talking about, we've had real-life local cyclists as part of the design team to make sure you can take your bikes onto the brand new trains, and we've got best-in-class facilities for that, because it's a really, really important point. So if we can ask Tony to take that away and find out about Conway Park and come back to you, because you're spot on. Jerry, I'll bring you in as the last one, and then I'll sum up, mate.
Thanks, Cillian. Yeah, no, it's just to highlight, obviously, I know Chris is new to the committee, but this is an issue that we've discussed extensively over the last couple of years, and we realise the importance of it. And as you say, the officers and the members have gone into it in great detail, but that's just for comment. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks for that, Jerry. Well, I'll sum up so we can move on, and I won't repeat what others have said so eloquently. But let me give a kind of a balanced assessment. That it'd be churlish for me to say that this was all bad, because I know that it isn't, and there's certain aspects in there, like a national guide in mind, that frankly has been long absent from the rail network that we desperately need. You know, if I give a very specific example, I have no doubt if we'd have had a proper guide in mind that the chaos of May 2018 would not have happened, because one of the reasons that happened is you had a number of different railway organisations knew what was coming but didn't dare say, because they had their own silo objectives and they didn't want to be the ones that kind of stuck their heads above the parapet to state the bleeding obvious, frankly. So that is going to be a good thing. However, like a number of people have said, I have to say I do have a number of concerns. I won't repeat the points that individuals have made, but I'll make some different ones as well. We've spent a long period of time looking at what I believe is the best way of buying new trains. And the reason that we are buying our new trains, that they will be publicly owned for us, is that we have worked out that it will be a third cheaper to do it that way than doing it through the privatised leasing Roscoe model, as it's called. I often refer to the Roscoes, the rolling stock leasing companies, as the loan sharks of the rail industry. And I mean that exactingly. They are the kind of railway equivalent of Bright House and Crazy George's. It's a bit like trying to buy a house with a credit card. You know, you're paying through the nose for bog standard stuff. And the fact that, you know, that hasn't been acknowledged in this white paper, and that part of the industry seems as if it's going to be untouched, is a huge missed open goal there. Because quite frankly, if we want a more effective railway, let's use the money that's going in much more efficiently. And the best place to actually kind of deal with that is to look at those rolling stock leasing companies, rather than, as everyone's rightfully said, worried about what it might mean for railway jobs and fares that people have to pay. I think my other concerns as well, as others said, about how this has the potential to be a very London-centric operation. My concern around it is the fact it's going to be based on the existing network rail regions, of which we would basically be in what is called London North Western. And as we know from that existing structure, there is a greater focus at the southern end of the route in and out of London than there is on our patch. So that's something that genuinely needs to be properly addressed. I would argue, and have argued publicly and will continue to argue, this body should not be headquartered in London. It should be headquartered outside of London, and where better than the home of the passenger railway globally than the Liverpool City region. Fantastic opportunity for our region. I know we would all welcome the opportunities that that would bring. And the final point is, though, whilst it's pleasing that it acknowledges the devolved settlement we've got with Merseyrail, as Steve's manifesto has shown, we want to go so much further than that with the devolved aspiration of Merseyrail for all. We want to have the opportunity, just like the Scottish Government do, to run Merseyrail in the public sector, as the Scottish Government have that choice with ScotRail. We want to have local control of the infrastructure, because we believe that's a much better way of actually getting a more efficient and cost-effective way of doing things, so we can actually put some of that money to better use in expanding the network and providing more services. And equally, for the eastern half of our region, where currently Northern Rail are running some of those services, we believe a lot of those stopping services should have the ability to come into Merseyrail, so we can have a genuine integrated rail network across our region. I think, as you quite rightfully point out, Tony, the key for all of us, as Steve has already started with his letter back to government, is to lobby really, really hard to make sure that the Liverpool City region is at the forefront of actually getting the devolved settlement we need, rather than being done to by what unfortunately will end up being a middle-aged man sat in Whitehall if, you know, kind of this just keeps going in the way that it may go. So I'll put my comments there accordingly. We obviously look forward to kind of further reports as they come back, and how we can actively shape that whole agenda. But if I can move the recommendations on paragraph on page 37, if that's agreed. Excellent. Let's move on to the last few items then, and item 10 is the Mersey Travel Outturn for 2020-2021, and Sarah Johnston, as the Assistant Director for Finance, is going to take us through this.
Thank you, Chair. This report provides members of the committee with details of the outturn financial performance for Mersey Travel for the financial year ending 31st of March 2021. The report covers both the revenue and capital outturn and also looks at the reserves as a consequence. The format of the report will be fairly clear to members and follows the format that we've used during the year. And the first section deals with the revenue outturn. Table 3.3 provides a service level analysis of our outturn spend against the revised budget and the consequential variances against that. A much more detailed analysis is provided at Appendix 1, which breaks services down on a subjective basis. For members' information, 3.4 provides an overview of some of the significant variances that have arisen at outturn. Members will note that at the end of the year, there was a positive variance of 4.8 million, which has been transferred to Mersey Travel's reserves. 3.5 provides details of the breakdown of that transfer to reserves. Second part of the report, which 3.6 and 3.7 deals with the capital outturn, and again, the explanation of the variances thereon. Outturn for capital was 88.5 million against the budget, which represented a 58% spend. And again, Appendix 2 provides a much more detailed analysis of the spend by scheme. Perhaps unsurprisingly, given the impact of COVID, there's been a degree of slippage on the capital programme, and consequently there's been a need to revise the capital programme that we had for 21-22. And this has been amended at 3.8 and reflects a slippage from the outturn. Members will also note that in the revised budget there are not revised figures for rolling stock, and this is really as a function of the fact that there is a much more detailed review being undertaken of the rolling stock position, and that will be reported back to members and incorporated into a revised budget in due course. The final section of the report details the reserves position. 3.1.11 shows the outturn, and that basically takes account of the transfers in and out of reserves as part of the financial year 2021. The next table at 3.13 brings in the projected use of reserves and the position at the end of the year 21-22, and again that picks up the proposed use of reserves for the revised capital programme. Now, whilst the overall quantum of reserves does look particularly healthy, there are still some significant financial risks that the organisation faces. And if some of these were to crystallise, would necessitate potentially quite a significant utilisation of reserves. Some of the more significant risks facing the organisation are detailed at 3.14. I'm quite happy to take any particular questions members may have on specific items in the report.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Sarah. We've got any questions or comments? Anyone? Steve, and then John.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And hopefully for newer members, the format that we use is understandable and is sort of self-explanatory, and it's set out in a pattern that's developed over a number of years. And thanks to officers and members working together, it's in a relatively edible form. I would say for those of us who have budgetary issues back on our own areas, such as the Whittle, and it may on the front of it look a fairly robust outcome, and it is always better to be in balance and in obviously in surplus than in deficit. However, this is set against a rejigged budget, so officers and members are attempted to second guess what the outcome of COVID and the like would be. So these outcomes are set against a best guess budget, I think was the phrase we used at that time. And there's so much uncertainty around with coming out of COVID as there was going into COVID. I would suggest we need to remain very cautious in terms of the budgetary situation. The major differences are explained within the report. One of the officers mentioned before, we are the only franchised rail set up in the country that has had no money from government. Can't for the life of me understand that. We also have a year-on-year loss of 2% of what is the rail support grant. That we have accepted, we seem to have accepted that. We're never going to get that back. So that's now entailed in the budget. That's worth around about $250,000 a year. Through no fault of our own, came as part of the devolution deal. So there are lots of things that threaten the budgets in the future. And I think the areas that are most under threat, we don't know what's going to happen to the money that's going to bus companies post-COVID. So we have bolstered that part of the reserve in case the bus companies themselves retaliate to any loss of income by cutting services. And those are the services our people deserve and want. So I think the budget outturn, and already it's miles out of date, is it not? Because we're now, this reports the position at March. We're now coming up to nearly to August. So you will be receiving these reports throughout the year. But I commend the officers for getting the budgets as close to balanced and in a better position than balanced. And I'd just like to say that we did deliver to all the constituent authorities a levy freeze. And I certainly know on the Whittle that related to something in the region of £460,000, which was well used in providing vital services to the people of Whittle. So all in all, I'm happy with the budget situation, but it is very precarious. So I don't go jumping for joy and try and spend money we haven't got, is my word of caution. Thank you.
Absolutely, Steve. Couldn't sort of agree with you more there. I think that's a very, very salutary assessment. John.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to thank you very much for the report initially. Thank you. Follow on from Steve's remarks there, please, if I may. I'm just wondering if we can just reflect briefly on the state of the finances of the organisation per se. I'm just wondering, going forward, how robust are our finances, say, over the next 5 or 10 years, for example? Are we a viable going concern, or how far are we down that famous graph of doom? Secondly, what is the impact of COVID? How much has that impacted on our finances? And again, going forward, because we're not out of the woods yet with COVID-19. And then finally, how, if any way, will this affect our climate change agenda? What will the impact again on our finances, and how much money can we allocate towards this in order to help with our carbon reduction strategy? Thank you. I know there are 3 big questions, and I don't expect you to come up with genius answers straight away, but if you want to reflect on them, that'd be great. If you want to give us a brief answer now and then a fuller answer later, that'll be fine as well. Thank you.
Sarah, if you can come back. Sorry, John, do you want to come in, or whoever wants to address John's points?
Thank you, Councillor Stockton. I'll let Sarah off the hook and I'll take some of those. For those of you who don't know, I'm John Fogarty. I'm the Director of Corporate Services at the Combined Authority, which is the Finance Director roles wrapped up in that role. So taking those in order, in terms of going concern, yeah, we are still and we would remain a going concern on, as Sarah referenced. I think the biggest risks we've got are around the rail and the Merseyrail network, but we believe we've got adequate provision for what may happen, and we hope it doesn't happen. And I think we have kind of seen off the biggest risks around the rail network at the moment. So, you know, you can take some assurance from that. Also, to be fair, our external auditors are not questioning our viability, and they would. It's something that they definitely would look at. So on that basis, I think hopefully you can take some assurance that we're well provided for. In terms of COVID, it's difficult to put a number on it because the effect of COVID on the public transport environment has principally been felt by the bus and rail operators in terms of direct revenue, but obviously we've been indirectly implicated. Sorry, our direct costs, our direct impact has been on the supported bus network and on ferries and on tunnel tolls as well. But we have been compensated through the government scheme in those areas. One of the implications of COVID obviously also was that we needed to keep paying our suppliers at pre-COVID levels, and they included bus operators and rail operators for big ticket items like concessionary travel. We're kind of released from that obligation now, but equally we are very aware that there are risks in destabilising those operators and the liquidity that may come back to bite us. So it's a very difficult balancing act, but we still are receiving income from, or compensation, if you like, from government, and there's a bus recovery package as well that's been announced that takes us to, I think, the end of this year and possibly beyond, but we need to do some work with DFT and the bus operators in particular to work on that. And we continue to work with Merseyrail on a daily basis. We receive financial projections from Merseyrail to make sure that they've got the appropriate level of liquidity they need to continue their operations. In terms of what this may mean for our climate change and our zero carbon objectives, I guess that's there's obviously a lot of political decisions around that could be taken. I'm helping the Mayor at the moment to look at a kind of post-COVID medium-term financial strategy that takes account of the Mayor's manifesto, but also the financial situation it is at the moment. And what I will say that is that the zero carbon agenda and the air quality agenda and the impact on climate change is very much to the fore in his thinking, and I think what will emerge will be something that does try to accommodate that moving forward. I guess very much on the theme that Councillor Robinson has just mentioned around trying to avoid a car-based recovery and also a kind of inclusive recovery that takes account of issues like inequalities, and air quality is one of those inequalities that will be hopefully will be picked up through that.
Yeah, thanks for that, John. I think that's suitably reassuring but sobering at the same time. Look, I'm not going to add anything more than what sort of John and Steve have said, other than to say that kind of, look, we're not out of the woods yet because we're not out of the pandemic yet. So we need to kind of keep a very keen eye on the finances as we go forward, and we look forward to further kind of reports at future meetings. So if I can move the recommendations on on page 45, if that's agreed. Excellent. I've talked a lot about trains today, so let's do a bit of buses. Last couple of items, folks, we're nearly there. Item number 11 is the quarterly bus update, and Tony McDonough, who's our Bus Network Performance Manager, is going to take us through this. So, Tony, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. You get another Tony this afternoon, folks, but as Liam said, the bus side now. So I'm going to start this quarterly update, again, talking about COVID-19. Segue straight into the bus side of things. So my colleagues and I have been working very closely with our operators in our response to the pandemic, and the report outlines to you some of the work we've been doing regarding use of face coverings, social distancing and reduced capacities on the bus network. And what I would say is throughout the last few months there's been some really close collaborative working with our bus operators, both the larger alliance members and the smaller bus operators. It very much is a collective response to dealing with the issues that the pandemic keeps us busy with. And it's certainly taken over quite a large proportion of my day job being operational. We have weekly meetings with Arriva and Stagecoach to discuss the situation, and there's regular communications with the smaller operators, and we are directly linked to our transport cell, which has met again this afternoon. We have our travel safe team, and in particular the PCSOs working alongside colleagues in Merseyside Police, who are monitoring the network in terms of face covering compliance. And at the time this report was pulled together, compliance levels were circa 96%. So really positive for the city region. And I think we sort of stole a lead on this when things began to restart in our approach to using that resource to monitor the network in such a way we've been able to provide good intelligence back to DFT on our progress and an assurance to them, I suppose, that the additional support and funding that we've had has been well used and that we've been monitoring and managing the network very, very well in recent times. Current patronage levels, I mentioned this morning, at around 63, 65%. At the time of writing this, it was 70. So it has dropped a little bit. But what we have found up until now with restrictions is that patronage has been very much linked to good weather. So we've seen a lot more ridership patronage with good weather. Particularly this week, Monday was a very poor day patronage-wise. Probably a bit of a hangover from the weekend and a certain sporting event. We've had some issues with lack of clarity over funding moving forward, but we've been lobbying DFT on the transport cell and regular comms with them about funding that's been made available. And we are at a point now where we've just received notice that some elements are about to end as the final restrictions are lifted. And so we're working now towards that notice period and what comes next in terms of funding as we move into the next stage of recovery. I think that's probably a summary of where we are with COVID-19 at the moment. There is quite a bit of activity this afternoon, which I will catch up on after the meeting in relation to what's happening from Monday. I mentioned in the presentation this morning about the National Bus Strategy, Bus Back Better, and information surrounding BSIPs. So I won't dwell on that. I'll move forward to save time. But our BSIP, our Bus Service Improvement Plan, will be produced by the end of October this year. And that will really be that sort of ambitious document that will seek to secure some of that £3 billion of funding that will be made available through the National Bus Strategy. It's been agreed in principle that the existing Bus Alliance will be used as the basis for delivering recovery actions in partnership with bus operators. In terms of our alliance, the next stage and the agreed milestones will be provided within the next quarterly report. If I can move on to green bus routes, further work has taken place with relevant constituent council partners to ensure understanding of proposed interventions for the Liverpool to St Helens bus route. This will enable the consultant team to finalise the proposed TCF package for interventions and develop more detailed designs clearly showing the bus priority measures that are to be introduced along that corridor. Discussions regarding progressing the work on further green bus routes such as the 53 and 86 services have begun, and that's in order to develop those plans and make sure those designs are, as we would term, shovel ready to enable the City Region Combined Authority to invest in these key corridors. In terms of our City Region high bus trial, the tender process for the procurement for the first 20 hydrogen fuel cell electric buses is now has been live, and it was due to end on the 28th of May, which I can confirm has happened. The evaluation process, which involves Merseytravel, Arriva, Stagecoach, that is now ongoing to determine the successful bus manufacturer. And the City Region Combined Authority are supporting operators in the procurement of a fuel option. It's a process running parallel, or was running parallel to the bus manufacturer. A number of suppliers have been met to date, and at the time of writing this report, a market research exercise and procurement back have been developed. If I can come on to bus reform, the point I wanted to summarise for today was that work streams have been progressing the individual elements of the management case, of the bus reform assessment, and an outline for market engagement and COVID modelling has been developed as part of that work. Moving forward, if I look at bus open data and customer information, our key achievement in this quarter is the development of a new colour-coded city centre bus map to simplify the network for customers. We're using the same colours that we've and continue to use in the Liverpool area bus map. We have brought some examples today, Chair. We felt it was best to bring a physical example rather than put it on the screen. So if members would like to consider a look at that this afternoon, they can do. But I think the maps really do speak for themselves. They look really good, and we're really pleased with our progress on them. If I can move forward to 3.8 travel safe. We have an interim 12-month plan, which was agreed by the board, Travel Safe Board, back in February, and work to sort of achieve what we're going to do next has already begun. We are meeting now with colleagues in Merseyside Police to really sort of have a fundamental review of Travel Safe and the PCSO function as part of that work, and that will help steer us towards our 3-year plan that sits in the background as part of our strategy for this year, which will be presented around Q3. A couple of things I wanted to mention really was that we've had a really useful meeting with Crime Stoppers recently, which we're going to bring in as part of our proposals in the next Travel Safe Board meeting. And we've also had a piece of work commissioned with a company called iSensing. This was developed in the latter part of last year to look at the impact of an impact assessment on the potential for sexual harassment on the transport network. It's a piece of work that our Travel Safe Chair, John Stockton, was very keen to support. We've had the results back and we'll take them to Travel Safe. We've got the agenda setting meeting in the next week and we'll discuss it there. But really, really important findings from that report, which we'll take forward. And I'm sure that we'll be able to bring that to the Q2 update in this committee. Next point, 3.9, contract management streamlining. So we have the new EP Morris contract management system that's been brought in to support the bus team. And we're at a stage now where we've completed the parallel running of the operator payments in both the new system as opposed to the old system. And we have the confidence with the payment system that's running as it should be. We are now at the point where we're finalising the reporting dashboards, and once that's done, the project will be signed off. So Q2 will be able to give you a much more detailed update on that and bring those reporting functions to demonstrate. And my final point today under 3.10 was in relation to the network performance team, whom I manage, and we are in the process of procuring 10 new electric vehicles to support the work we do in that team. So there's a couple of things just to iron out on that, but in the next few days that will be confirmed, and that really does sort of demonstrate our green credentials as we move away from diesel vehicles to electric cars and vans for the combined authority for their staff to use. I think it really demonstrates our credentials towards decarbonisation. That summarises the report. It's a whirlwind, quick stop through there, but if members do have any questions, I am more than happy to take them.
No, that's brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Tony. Have we got any questions or comments that anyone wants to raise? Go on, Gordon.
Turning our microphone on to start with, is that it's mentioned in there alongside the equalities and other issues about there being no IT issues. I just wondered if you give consideration to any point that it's been mentioned previously about those kind of things like ransomware and things like that, because I know the interim director of transport has been on courses with that lately, and Gary Evans has been, so maybe there's just something that tells us we're robust about it. If that's worthwhile, I don't know if you see where the point's going to.
Tony, I don't know if you want to respond.
Sorry, I missed a little bit of that then. With regard to IT systems and the potential for cyber attack, was that right? Or? Yeah. There's a piece of work that's going on internally with Ian Hawkins that I will feed into and pick up with him. So yes, we'll take that forward.
Yeah, the way we do equalities, we do the same thing, Chair.
Yeah, please. John, are you indicating or?
Yeah, just a quick one from me, Chair, if I may. Yeah, it's not a question, Tony. It's just to say thanks to you, Matt, and colleagues for the extraordinary work that's going on within the bus service department. And my heartfelt thanks for all the hard work that you do on behalf of the authority, because we really are moving a lot of agendas forward with this, with bus devolution, green agenda, etc. So thank you very much for that. And please pass those comments onto your colleagues, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I will do.
Yeah. Here, John. If there's no... Oh, Natalie.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that report. And I know we said how brilliant the report was previously. I forgot to add to my wish list, to your wish list, talking buses. So basically, you know, as we plan ahead, because there are buses in other parts of the not our city region, but in London and other parts, where it actually tells you which stop you're coming to. So yeah, that if you can add that to the wish list, thanks.
I'll do that, Chair. It's done. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks ever so much, Tony. And obviously on the issue of talking buses, that was very much clear in Steve's manifesto. The hydrogen buses we are buying will be talking buses, and we've made sure that the kind of bus operators know that they should not be bringing a new vehicle to this area that isn't a talking bus. It's the very basic of customer information, not just an accessibility issue, it's just about looking after everyone accordingly. If you get automated announcements on trains and trams, you should on bus. No ifs, no buts. Okay, if there's no further questions or comments, if I can move the recommendations on page 63, if that's agreed, and then we'll move on to our last item, which is Tony taking us through the East Coast Mainline consultation. So Tony, briefly over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just to bring the panel, the authority members to attention. This East Coast Mainline consultation is the route from London to Edinburgh via Peterborough, Doncaster, York, Darlington, Durham and Newcastle. In one way, it's a good news story in that in the May 2022 timetable, there are a lot of train companies who want to bring additional services onto that line. In particular, it's the London North Eastern Railway, LNER, and they've bought through the DFT, there's a whole new fleet of trains coming in, and there's a potential to run up to 39 more train services a day. In addition, there's other train companies who want to run more trains on that line. However, there's a problem. There is a capacity limit. It was only when I was going through the research I realised currently near Newcastle there's only a limit of 6 trains per hour on that main line. It's twin track, and especially when they're running high-speed trains and freight trains, it really does become a congested and difficult bit of infrastructure. So the issue here is how do we allow extra trains to run and retain the existing services? Well, the industry, led by Network Rail, pulled together a team called an Event Steering Group, an ESG, and they've been working through the issues and pulled forward a timetable. And what's happening now is each individual company is now produced their own consultation on this. I think this links back to the previous one about GBR, about one controlling mind. And at the moment, all these train companies run their own train timetables, and then the Network Rail not having the infrastructure to apply for it all. We've got this clash now. Train companies want to run extra trains. There's not enough space for them. So the consultation in Section 4 highlights a couple of the main issues. I mean, it seems a long way away for us, that east coast, but for us, there's a couple of issues. And what the proposed timetable does is it prioritises services going from London to Edinburgh at the expense of some of our services. So in 4.2, it says the most significant impact is that the Liverpool to Edinburgh service, a service we only got 18 months ago, is going to be cut back, so it'll become a Liverpool to Newcastle service. There's some services that run from Manchester through to Newcastle, and they'll be cut back as well. So I think in summary, and I think I include it in 4.5, the overview of the changes is very much an increase north to south, but a reduction of services east to west. And I think this is highlighted by one new train operator, brand new train operator called First East Coast Trains Limited. And they're going to be given 5 train paths per day between Edinburgh and London. And I think our view, and I think it's something we're working with our colleagues across the north, and we're working with officers in TfN to develop our response. But I think we feel that whilst it's welcome that we get extra train services from London to Edinburgh, we don't think it should be at the expense of existing services and certainly impacting upon our ability to make that connection. So, I think there's a balance here, but we're working with officers. At the moment, the consultation runs until the 5th of August when our response needs to go in. we're still waiting to get fully the responses from TFN. And what we didn't want to do was submit a response that was in any way contradictory. We wanted to be consistent and coherent across the North. So this report is really advising you what the situation is and just seeks permission for us to put that response together and delegate the authority to the Chair to actually submit that on the 5th of August. That's it, Chair.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Tony. I'm conscious of time, so let me kind of just pull all this together. Because of timescales, as Tony says, we're seeking delegated authority to myself and Shane as the Interim Director of Integrated Transport. But longer-standing members of the committee will know that when we've ever done that, I've always made sure that we circulate the draft response a couple of days in advance so all committee members can put forward any final comments that we can include accordingly before we send that off. And I will endeavour to make sure that we do that once more as part of that. I'll also say that kind of, as Tony's rightfully kind of pulled together, I imagine when members saw this on the agenda about the East Coast Main Line being on the complete other side of the country, why has that got anything to do with us? Why are we commenting on that? Well, ordinarily we wouldn't, but as Tony's rightfully pointed out, the fact that what is being proposed would end our direct train from Lime Street that runs through Knowsley, up through St Helens and all the way across to the East Coast and up to Edinburgh would end and be curtailed at Newcastle is completely unacceptable. We've known for a long, long period of time that because of our coastal location, we have less direct services to other big cities across the country than others, and we're not going to accept less. That's fundamentally unacceptable. Now, you'd say that's easy for us to say, being on the far west of that route and being affected by it, but it isn't just us saying that. Our good friends in the North East are quite clearly saying, as much as they welcome further trains to London, they prefer and prioritise east-west services going across to Yorkshire, Greater Manchester and across to ourselves as more important. And when you dig into the detail of this, my great suspicion and scepticism is actually this isn't about passenger journeys for people that live in the North East down to London. It's actually more about giving a bit more capacity to people in places like Peterborough in that London commuter belt. And quite frankly, that's levelling down. And there's a real irony here, isn't there, that we're talking about this on a day that Boris Johnson's been delivering a speech in the West Midlands about levelling up. This is our old bête noire north-south divide actually rearing its ugly head once more. And it ain't acceptable, and we're going to make sure that we put that in our consultation response. And I know right across the north, we are united on that front, and hopefully government will see the folly of what they're proposing and actually prioritise our service over and above things that benefit the southeast of England once more. So if we can agree the recommendations that are with that report in paragraph 2 on page 1 of the supplementary agenda, if that's agreeable to everyone. We'll flick through the last few items because item number 13, public question time, we have no public questions, although we always welcome them when members of the public want to bring them forward. Equally with item 14, we don't have any public petitions or statements, but once more would always sort of readily welcome them, have in the past. And item number 15, any other urgent items of business approved by myself? Well, I just want to say a few words because today is the penultimate day in the career of a very significant individual for Mersey Travel, the CA and the City Region, because Frank Rogers, as our Chief Executive, retires tomorrow. Now, Frank had hoped to be here today, but unfortunately he has to isolate because his son has tested positive for COVID, so Frank and his family are having to isolate. And obviously, we send our very best wishes to his son and all Frank's family accordingly. I hope he will be watching on the live feed because I am going to sort of say these words, and I hope he's watching, otherwise it's a bit like a eulogy, isn't it, when someone isn't here. But I think it's fair to say that Frank has played an absolutely huge role in this organisation. Yeah, when we think about, he's a chartered civil engineer by trade. You know, kind of he's in his early career, played some really important roles in very significant infrastructure projects across the UK. He had a very sort of significant role on the Channel Tunnel. He's actually had some really important roles on some London Underground projects. And for a bloke from Liverpool, it was great that he did come home in 2006 and joined Mersey Travel as the general manager of the Mersey Tunnels. And then in 2009 was promoted to Customer Services Director. And following that, he was then promoted to Integrated Transport Director and Deputy Chief Executive, and ultimately became the Chief Executive of Mersey Travel, and then the Combined Authority. And particularly picked up the cudgels at the Combined Authority not long after Steve was elected as the Metro Mayor, and literally built the organisation from having 0 employees to now having over 200 employees in a variety of different departments. Very genuinely, the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority is an organisation that Frank Rogers built. And when you think about some of the different projects he's been involved in over the years, he's led the charge on the city and the city region's extremely strong case to get HS2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail all the way into the city and the region. And it's always been fantastic having a tunnels engineer being able to kind of tell the DFT exactly the rationale behind what we need to see. He's also led on some huge kind of projects, whether it's the first brand new station in the region at Maghull North, whether it was the upgrade of Newton-le-Willows, whether it was the reinstatement of the Halton Curve, giving us direct trains to North Wales for the first time in 40 years, as well as other railway benefits like the aforementioned direct service to Edinburgh and one to Glasgow accordingly. And obviously having led the organisation in signing the cheque of almost £500 million to buy the trains that David is leading on. I could go on and on in terms of the things that he's done in transport, in terms of the stuff that he's done within the Combined Authority. And again, starting that organisation pretty much from scratch, and actually been able to kind of do other things like launching Be More, which is effectively a UCAS-style apprenticeship hub, the first of its kind in this country, and leading on things like Housing First, which is a really important project that actually kind of gives not only homeless people a home, but giving them all the wraparound support that they need to stay in that home and help their lives going forward. He's done so much in terms of what he's achieved for the organisation and the projects that he's delivered. I do just want to sort of say a few words on a kind of personal level, because I will always be extremely grateful to Frank for all the sort of help and support he's given me over the years. And I will always greatly respect him for 3 kind of key reasons, actually. First and foremost, Frank has got a great sense of humour. He's a great laugh and good fun to be around. I was trying to think of some of the kind of funny stories over the years, just to recount one today. And the best one I can remember wasn't so much a joke that Frank was telling, but it was a scenario that played out a few years ago when myself and Frank and Marlene Quinn, who is a councillor in St Helens, many of us know and love greatly, who was Gordon's predecessor as Vice Chair. And we went down to London for, I think it was a UTG parliamentary reception. And we were on the tube, and as we all know, whenever you're on the tube, it's usually packed with people, no one talking to one another. And Marlene pipes up, as she sometimes did, from the other side of the carriage, and I won't try to kind of mimic a voice, but she said, Frank, what turns your wife on? And the whole carriage just turned to Frank, whose mouth sort of dropped, not knowing what to say, because what was the Vice Chair of the authority asking him? And then the penny dropped with Marlene. She said, no, Frank, I didn't mean that. She's a midwife. What shift she working? When's she going to be home tonight? And Frank thought that was fantastic, because he then understood what she'd meant from being in a very kind of embarrassed situation to be one that we've laughed about many times since. I think the second element of why I really respect Frank, and kind of he's going to be a huge, tough act to follow, is quite frankly Stakhanovite work effort. He's always in when the office opens first thing in the morning, and he's leaving for home when it closes. And, the kind of times you will get phone calls and emails from him round the clock, 7 days a week. I often think about, many years ago, I went on a course with Network Rail where you were asked to think about, in team working, who's the most dedicated, hard-working, reliable person you've ever worked with. Well, I can honestly say, hand on heart, if I was asked that question today, the answer to that is Frank Rogers. He really has put a shift in for this city region. And that's the kind of final point that I really respect him for, because I think Frank is genuinely a fantastic role model for all of our young people across this city region. You know, he's a local bloke. Frank Rogers from Lowood Street in Kenny put his head down, he got stuck in at school, he was lucky enough to go to university and get his engineering degree, and through a lot of hard work ended up as the most senior public servant in our region. And I just think that's a fantastic example and frankly a fantastic story that we want for so many of our young people across our region. It's great that we've had someone like Frank that we can hold up as that great example. So he's not here today, but I know on behalf of all of us, we want to express our deep, heartfelt thanks for everything he's done over the years and wish him a very long, very healthy and very, very happy and well-earned retirement. So, Frank, if you're at home, thanks very much and all the very, very best. And I don't know whether he'll be cursing at the computer screen at this moment in time, having said all of those things accordingly. But unless anyone else wants to add anything, Gordon, I'll give you the last word.
I'd just like to add to that, because I think in the past there's many members who've been here who would like to have been able to say to Frank, you know, well done for all that you've done. One of the things that I recall about Frank is probably we could have some good, really good conversations, to put it mildly, in disagreements. We could disagree strongly, but in things that we agreed in, we could agree and move on. And I would say that one of the aspects that I always found with Frank was his real passion showed through in that, when you could have that dialogue with someone and you move on to something else, but you always respected. He had a passion for what he was doing here, and I hope his retirement goes well and everything goes well for his family, in line with what you've said, Liam.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Gordon. Steve?
Just obviously to echo everything you've said about Frank, but just on behalf of the people of Whittle, thanks for the committee coming over here today. Hope you enjoyed the facilities and what New Brighton had to offer. And I believe the cheque's in the post. Is that right? Okay.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Steve. And obviously, it's been great to be here in very, very unique circumstances. Hopefully, for our next meeting, we'll be able to be back in Man Island. Otherwise, we might be back on the phone to see if we can pop back once more. If there's no further questions or comments or any other contributions, I don't think there will be, just like to sort of thank everyone for their attendance today. Wonderful to be having a meeting in person again, and look forward to seeing you all soon at our next meeting. And I'll close the meeting accordingly. Thank you.